Rain swept over the village of Wexley Hollow in long, unbroken veils, silvering the crooked chimneys and beating against the churchyard gate where Caroline Whitby stood, her mourning veil plastered to her face. The tolling of the funeral bell carried through the valley, solemn and unhurried, as though even heaven pitied the young woman who had lost not only her father, but every fragment of security left to her name. Beneath the sodden branches of yew, she watched the gravediggers spade, rise, and fall. The sound was soft and final, an ending disguised as routine labor. When the last clod of earth fell, Caroline lowered her gaze, her lips moving soundlessly in prayer. There was no one beside her to murmur amen. Around her, whispers slithered through the drizzle. A merchant's wife leaned close to her companion, her voice a thread of pity wrapped in superiority. Poor Miss Whitby. The vicar's debts were heavier than his sermons, I hear, and no relatives to claim her. Such a tragedy. Another voice, younger and shriller, added, "A woman alone is rarely a woman respected." Caroline heard them without reaction. The words washed over her like the rain, cold, familiar, inevitable. She turned from a grave and began the long walk down the hill toward the village, her boots sinking into the wet earth. The streets were narrow and uneven, the cottages crouched together as though conspiring. Curtains stirred as she passed. The butcher's boy paused in his sweeping to offer a sympathetic look, but his mother hissed and pulled him inside. Caroline's fingers tightened around the reticule that held her father's pocket Bible and the last of her coins. Her black gloves were soaked through. The chill bit at her skin, yet she walked with measured dignity, back straight, chin lifted, a final defiance against a world that now measured her worth in shillings and gossip. By evening she reached the small inn that still dared to serve her. Inside, the hearth gave a sullen glow. The innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Linton, watched her approach with a cautious kindness. "You'll be needing supper, Miss Whitby?" she asked. Caroline managed a faint smile. "Only tea, if you please." When the cup arrived, chipped but steaming, Caroline drank slowly, aware of every eye that flickered toward her. She was no longer the vicar's gracious daughter who read scripture to the elderly and played pianoforte for Sunday guests. She was a curiosity, a genteel ruin fallen among tradesmen. A folded sheet of newsprint lay abandoned on the counter, its edges curling from the damp. Something in its columns caught her eye. It was a notice, brief and stark amid the lists of estate auctions and shipping schedules. Household cook required. Wexley Hall, Northumberland. Applicants to present themselves with references. Caroline's heart stuttered. Wexley Hall. She knew the name as everyone in the county did. The seat of Alexander Hawthorne, the 9th Duke of Wexley. A man seldom seen since the scandal that had driven him from London 5 years before. The details varied with each telling. That his betrothed had jilted him for a titled fortune hunter. That he had struck a man in a duel. That he had retreated to his northern estate and closed his heart to all society. They called him the Cold Duke, a title half pity, half warning. The innkeeper's wife noticed her gaze. "You're thinking of it?" she asked quietly. "It's hard service, they say. The Duke keeps few staff and fewer friends. A cook's post, Miss Whitby, it's not fitting for a lady of your upbringing." Caroline folded the notice, her voice low but steady. And yet, it would be honest work. That night, in the small room she could scarcely afford, she wrote her application by candlelight. The paper trembled beneath her hand, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Each word she penned, competent, industrious, unafraid of solitude, was a thread stitching dignity to desperation. When she sealed the letter with the last of her wax, she whispered a prayer that necessity might disguise itself as opportunity. Days later, a messenger arrived with an embossed envelope bearing the Hawthorne crest. The seal broke cleanly, the script within neat and impersonal. "Miss Whitby, your services are accepted. Present yourself at Wexley Hall by week's end." As the carriage carried her northward through rolling hills and bare-limbed trees, Caroline watched the landscape grow wilder, the villages scarcer, until the moors stretched endless and unwelcoming. At last, Wexley Hall appeared, a vast silhouette of stone and slate, its towers rising from the mist like something half-remembered from legend. The iron gates opened with a groan, admitting her into a realm of silence. Inside, the hall was dim, filled with the scent of oak and old ash. Portraits lined the walls, grim ancestors in powdered wigs, their painted eyes cold with expectation. A servant led her through corridors where the air felt untouched by laughter. In the great dining room, the Duke awaited. Alexander Hawthorne stood by the window, his figure tall and severe against the pallid light. He turned slowly as she entered, revealing a face of sculpted reserve. Handsome, perhaps, but sharpened by solitude. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of habitually suppressed emotion. "Miss Whitby, is it? You have been engaged as cook. I value order and discretion above all. The household observes quiet hours. You will find that conversation, like seasoning, is best used sparingly." Caroline curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." For a moment he studied her, eyes unreadable, before turning back to the window. "That will be all." Dismissed, she followed the servant toward the servants' wing. As she passed beneath the archway, she glanced once more toward the solitary figure framed in gray light. He stood motionless, a man carved from stone, gazing out upon lands he seemed too weary to possess. In that instant, Caroline felt no fear, only a strange recognition, the quiet ache of one soul glimpsing another equally wounded. She drew a steady breath, straightened her shoulders, and descended toward the kitchens where the warmth of the hearth awaited. Outside, the storm gathered strength against the moors, but within Wexley Hall, the first faint ember of an unexpected story had begun to glow. The following morning, mist lay heavy over the grounds of Wexley Hall, coiling through the hedgerows and softening the edges of its ancient stones. Caroline rose before dawn, her breath fogging in the chill as she entered the cavernous kitchen. The great iron range stood cold and sullen, its flue clogged with neglect. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work. Soon, the clang of fire tongs and the crackle of fresh kindling stirred life into the heart of the house. By the time the first servants shuffled in, rubbing their eyes, the scent of baking bread and coffee drifted upward, threading through corridors long accustomed to silence. The staff regarded her with guarded curiosity. The housekeeper, Mrs. Allen, a stout woman with a gaze that could curdle milk, inspected Caroline's work as though judging a rival. "The Duke likes his meals plain," she advised curtly. "No frills, no sauces. He eats to live, not for pleasure." Caroline inclined her head politely. "As you say." Yet when she plated the Duke's breakfast, a simple omelet and fresh loaf, she garnished it with a sprig of thyme, its green vivid against the pale porcelain. The housekeeper frowned but said nothing. The tray was carried upstairs by a footman, and Caroline returned to kneading dough. She did not expect the Duke to notice her efforts, yet when the tray was later brought back, a note rested beside the empty dish. In a precise, unhurried hand it read, "Acceptable. Continue as you are." The words were neither warm nor cold, merely measured. Still, she felt a strange satisfaction bloom beneath her composure. Days stretched into weeks. The rhythm of the household revealed itself, ordered, restrained, almost monastic. The Duke seldom descended from his study except to dine or walk the grounds. His presence was known more by the hush that followed him than by any spoken command. To the servants, he was a figure of myth, a man preserved in frost. Yet Caroline glimpsed, now and again, the faint fracture lines beneath that ice, a hesitation before speaking, a stillness too deliberate to be indifferent. One evening, as rain whispered against the panes, she lingered near the kitchen hearth long after the others had gone to their quarters. The hall above creaked, footsteps approached. When she turned, she found the Duke standing in the doorway, his coat damp from the storm. "The hour is late," he observed. His voice was low, yet not unkind. "I was tidying the larder, Your Grace," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. He studied her a moment longer. Few in this house trouble themselves beyond what is required. She met his gaze briefly before lowering it. Necessity often teaches diligence. A ghost of something, approval, perhaps, flickered across his features. "So it does," he murmured, and withdrew without further word. The next morning, she found upon the kitchen table a small parcel wrapped in linen. Inside lay a set of cooking utensils, polished silver and well-balanced, clearly belonging once to a finer age. A folded card rested atop them. For efficiency, it read. No signature, but none was needed. She traced her fingers along the handles, aware that gratitude would be misinterpreted, yet unable to stop the warmth rising in her chest. The gift did not go unnoticed. By noon, the servants' hall hummed with speculation. "A silver set, imagine," one maid whispered, "and given to a cook, no less." Mrs. Allen pursed her lips. "Improper familiarity, if you ask me. The Duke ought to remember his place as much as she hers." Caroline heard them and said nothing, her calm expression betraying none of the sting their words left behind. That evening, as she crossed the corridor with a tray, two visiting tradesmen passed through the foyer, their voices carrying. The cold Duke's found himself a distraction. One jested, a kitchen beauty to warm his hearth. The other chuckled crudely. "He's welcome to her. Who else would have him now?" Caroline froze, her knuckles whitening against the tray's edge. The Duke, descending the staircase at that moment, halted as their laughter echoed. His eyes swept the scene with a chilling precision. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "I suggest you find mirth elsewhere." The weight of his tone silenced them at once. They muttered apologies and departed. Caroline lowered her head, murmuring, "Forgive me, Your Grace." "I did not wish to," he interrupted, voice quieter still. "It is I who should beg pardon. The cruelty of idle tongues is not yours to bear." His gaze lingered, dark and unreadable. "Do not let their smallness diminish your worth." And then he was gone, leaving her breathless with confusion and a flicker of something perilously like hope. Later that night, when the servants had retired, Caroline stood by the kitchen window, watching lightning dance over the moors. She wondered at the strange contradictions of the man upstairs, so distant, yet capable of rare, piercing kindness. Somewhere in those lonely halls, he bore wounds as invisible as her own. But peace in such houses was never long-lived. Within a week, a sealed letter arrived from London, bearing the crest of Parliament. The Duke received it in his study and did not emerge until nightfall. When he did, his face was pale, eyes shadowed. As he passed through the corridor, Caroline glimpsed him through the open door, holding the crumpled letter over the fire. The wax seal melted, the parchment blackened. The flames licked at his gloved fingers, and yet he did not flinch. She stepped forward without thinking. "You'll burn yourself, Your Grace." He turned, startled by her presence. The faintest smile touched his lips, bitter, fleeting. "Some fires cannot be avoided, Miss Whitby. One must let them run their course." The parchment crumbled to ash. He regarded her for a long moment, something weary yet unspoken in his expression, before extinguishing the flame and retreating into shadow. As the night deepened, the wind rose against the shutters. Caroline remained by the hearth, staring at the darkened grate, her heart restless with questions she dared not voice. In that solitary hour, she understood that the Duke's coldness was not the absence of feeling, but its concealment, and that the secrets consuming him might soon engulf them both. Winter descended upon Northumberland with a vengeance. The moors lay hidden beneath a white silence, and the breath of every living thing seemed to hang suspended in the frozen air. Inside Wexley Hall, the fire in the great hearth struggled against draughts that slipped through stone and shutter. The Duke, who had grown accustomed to solitude, found even the stillness oppressive. He had dismissed all visitors and confined himself to his study, as though distance could extinguish the storm within him. Yet distance, he discovered, only sharpened the ache. Caroline moved quietly through the echoing halls, her footsteps muted by the thick rugs. The household had dwindled for the season, most servants sent to relatives in the south, but she had stayed. The Duke had not asked it of her, yet she sensed he expected it. Or perhaps, she admitted, she wished it. The days passed in near silence, her world reduced to the rhythm of meals, letters, and the occasional flicker of his shadow crossing the threshold. Then, one evening, he returned from a ride across the moor, his cloak heavy with frost, his face drawn and pale. She saw him stagger slightly as he entered the hall, his hand gripping the banister for balance. By the time she reached him, his strength failed. He collapsed to one knee, breath shallow. "Your Grace!" she cried, catching his arm. His skin burned beneath her touch. "You are fevered." He managed a faint shake of the head. "It is nothing, a chill." But the moment he tried to stand, the color drained from his face. With Mrs. Allen's help, Caroline guided him upstairs, her heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and resolve. They settled him in his chamber, the curtains drawn against the wind. When the doctor arrived hours later, he declared it influenza and warned that the fever must be watched through the night. Caroline did not leave his side. She tended the fire, bathed his brow, and coaxed him to drink broth between murmured dreams. At times, he spoke names she did not know, fragments of a life lived before heartbreak had hollowed him. Once, he whispered, "Charlotte, no, do not go," and her hand stilled over his. So that was the name of the ghost that haunted him. Days blurred into one another. The fever rose and fell like a tide. Caroline slept in a chair beside the bed, her body weary, yet her mind alert to every sigh. On the third night, as snow pressed against the window panes, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at her as though seeing a memory given flesh. "Miss Whitby," he rasped, "you are still here." "I could hardly abandon my post," she replied gently. "You would scold me for dereliction of duty." A weak smile touched his lips. "You mistake me. I have never known anyone to care for me without obligation." She set aside the basin, meeting his gaze. "Then you have not known me long enough." He studied her face with a quiet wonder, as though trying to remember the sensation of warmth. "You should not care for me," he said softly. "I have forgotten how to give anything back." "I do not ask it," she answered. "Only that you live." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he slept peacefully. When the fever broke at dawn, the air in the chamber changed. The Duke's color returned. The tremor in his hands subsided. Caroline lingered at his bedside, exhaustion etched in every line of her posture. As sunlight crept across the carpet, he stirred and saw her slumped in the chair, fast asleep, her cheek resting on the armrest, her hair loose from its pins. Something within him, long dormant, stirred painfully. He reached out, fingers trembling, and brushed a curl from her face. "You should not have stayed," he murmured. She did not wake, but a faint smile curved her lips, and he found himself smiling too, almost against his will. By the next evening, he was strong enough to sit by the fire. Caroline entered quietly with tea. He gestured to the chair opposite. "You have earned rest, Miss Whitby. Sit, if you please." It was the first time he had invited her to sit in his presence. She hesitated, then obeyed. For a moment, neither spoke. The flames danced between them, casting shifting light upon his features. "I owe you more than gratitude," he began. "You have shown me compassion I did not deserve." She shook her head. "Deserving has little to do with it. You needed care. I gave it. You make it sound simple." "It is simple," she said quietly. "Only pride complicates it." A shadow crossed his expression. "Then I am guilty of much complication." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness. He looked away, voice low. "I was engaged once. She betrayed me before the vows could bind us. I told myself that love was a folly meant to weaken men. Perhaps I was wrong." Caroline's heart tightened, but her tone remained steady. "You were not wrong to protect yourself. You were wrong only to let the wound define you." He smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen from him. "You speak as though you know the nature of wounds." "I do," she said. "When my father died, the village pitied me, then forgot me. I learned how quickly affection turns to absence." Silence settled, deep and fragile. Then, impulsively, he reached for her hand. The warmth of his touch startled her. His thumb brushed her knuckles, hesitant but deliberate. "If I were a better man," he said, "I would let you go before this becomes ruinous." She met his gaze, her voice a whisper. And if you were less a man, I would already have left. The words lingered between them, trembling like a candle flame. He released her hand abruptly, rising to his feet. You should go, he said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. She stood, curtsied faintly, and left the room without another word. Outside in the corridor, her heart raced with equal parts hope and dread. In his chamber, the Duke stood staring at the door long after she had gone, the firelight flickering across his face like confession. Neither knew that before another dawn broke, an unwelcome visitor would arrive at Wexley Hall, and the fragile bond between them would be tested in ways neither heart was prepared to endure. Spring crept over the moors with a tender insistence, melting the last traces of frost from the hedgerows and coaxing the first wildflowers to brave the cold. Wexley Hall seemed almost lighter in the shifting light, yet the undercurrent of unease lingered. Rumors from London had arrived with the post. Whispers of Caroline's impropriety, murmurs that the Duke had compromised his dignity by favoring a servant. The staff spoke cautiously, their eyes darting toward the kitchen where Caroline moved with quiet composure, unaware that society's judgment now pressed like an invisible weight upon her shoulders. One morning, the hall echoed with the sound of hooves. A carriage swept up the gravel drive, its polished panels gleaming in the weak sun. The door opened, and out stepped a woman of unmistakable poise and subtle menace. Charlotte Ashcombe, widow of the man who had once claimed the Duke's promise. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept the hall as though taking possession before even greeting him. Alexander Hawthorne, observing from the staircase, stiffened, his posture rigid with barely concealed tension. "Your Grace," Charlotte said, voice smooth as satin yet laced with challenge. "I trust you are well." He inclined his head, expression unreadable. "You are a surprise, Mrs. Ashcombe." Her gaze flicked toward the kitchen door, where Caroline paused in her work, flour-dusted hands resting on the counter. Recognition flared in her eyes, and she instinctively retreated, yet remained within view. Charlotte's lips curved in a smile that was half amusement, half warning. "I have come to discuss matters of propriety," Charlotte said, stepping closer. "It would be a shame if scandal found its way to the halls of Wexley." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You are welcome for discourse, but your insinuations are misplaced. Miss Whitby is neither a spy nor a usurper. She serves this house with diligence and honesty." Charlotte's smile faltered just a fraction. "A cook influencing the affairs of a duke? How charmingly convenient for you, Miss Whitby." Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked between them before she turned gracefully toward the door. "We shall see how long such arrangements endure." With her departure, the tension that had coiled in the hall remained. Caroline felt the sting of insult, her cheeks flushing, yet she did not retreat into silence. She busied herself with preparation for the midday meal, letting her hands steady the turmoil in her chest. The Duke watched from the doorway, expression softer now, though clouded with residual anger. "You bore yourself well," he said quietly. Many would have fled in indignation. "I have nowhere else to go," she replied simply, "and I do not flee from duty." He studied her a long moment, the line of his mouth softening. "You are more than duty, Miss Whitby. I would have the world know it, yet the world itself resists." The day passed with an almost oppressive quiet. When evening fell, Caroline lingered by the garden, tending early tulips and crocuses. The sky above the moors blushed with the sun's descent, painting the clouds in muted rose and gold. He joined her, silent at first, then spoke, voice low and deliberate. "I cannot shield you from every slight," he said. "Society is swift to judge and cruel in its persistence. Yet I would not have you leave for their displeasure." Her hands stilled among the blooms. "I would not leave, even if they condemned me." He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing in the fading light. "Then I must speak plainly. My heart has long been a fortress, its gates barred against folly and betrayal. You have breached it, Miss Whitby, not by force, but by steadfastness and courage. I find myself unable to imagine this hall or life without you." Her breath caught. "Your Grace." No titles, no station, no pretense. He continued, voice steady yet vulnerable. I choose you, not as a favor to sentiment, but as an acknowledgement of what truth can endure. If you will have me, I ask your hand in marriage. Tears gathered unbidden in her eyes, a mixture of relief, fear, and joy. I do, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own desire and the liberation from long-held uncertainty. He took her hands in his, their warmth grounding them against the chill of the moors. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath, time suspended in the union of hearts long tested by isolation, misfortune, and whispered scandal. When the household staff discovered their intent, shock rippled through the corridors. Yet Alexander's firmness silenced question and doubt alike. Her place is here, beside me, he announced with an authority that brooked no dissent. No word from the world outside can alter what is true within these walls. Preparations for a quiet wedding began almost immediately. The chapel, modest yet suffused with the light of spring, welcomed them in a hush of reverent anticipation. Friends loyal to the Duke and servants who had come to respect Caroline's unassuming strength gathered, each witnessing a union born not of convenience or station, but of mutual understanding, courage, and enduring affection. As they exchanged vows, Alexander's voice, steady and deliberate, carried through the nave, I promise you my heart, unguarded and unashamed, for all the days granted to us. Caroline responded with equal conviction, her words a pledge not only of love, but of partnership in a world that had sought to belittle them both. Outside, the moors stretched wide, bathed in golden light. The wind stirred the ribbons in Caroline's hair as Alexander lifted her hand to his lips. In that moment, the cold Duke was no longer cold. The fires that had smoldered unseen within him now burned openly, matched only by the quiet, resilient warmth she had brought into his life. Together, they stepped into the new day, the past shadows softened by the strength of a love that had endured storms, whispers, and frost to flourish at last. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.